My name is Leonardo Wang. I'm in ninth grade and I go to Middleton High School in Middleton, Wisconsin. My presentation is about the gene expression correlation between veganism and obesity. This is my outline. First, I'll talk about my background information, then I'll talk about challenges I face, then I'll talk about my design and method, and then I'll talk about my results, and finally, I'll talk about my future work. I use Google Sheets to make a scatter plot of the obesity rate versus vegan/vegetarian rate in all 50 US states. The scatter plot has an approximate line of best fit at y equals negative 2.5x plus 39. How do genes connect vegetarianism and obesity? Genes act as instructions for controlling an organism's traits. Gene expression shows how much of a gene is expressed on a tissue. SNPs are single nucleotide mutations, and EQTLs link SNPs to changes in gene expression. Right here I have a gene expression graph for the gene RMC1. I use GTEx to get this graph, and I have a diagram of a gene and a genetic variant here. Challenges, one of the biggest challenges I faced was there's approximately 20,000 human genes, so it was very hard to locate the genes associated with each trait, and then also having to find the tissues and cell types correlated with each gene. I used the GTEx portal tool, which allows you to look up a gene and gives the gene expression graphs as well as EQTLs for it. This is a diagram of the genes and tissues in the human body. Here's my method. First, I found the genes associated with each trait by looking it up on Google. Then I found gene expression correlations between genes and tissue types using the GPA2 tool. The GPA2 tool allows you to enter like two gene names of two genes and then compare the correlation of both on a specific tissue. I also use the GTEx portal tool to help me find similar SNPs between the veganism and obesity genes. I found two articles that helped me find the genes associated with each trait. The veganism genes are MPC1, RMC1, and RIOK3. The obesity genes are FTO, MC4R, LEP, LEPR, and POMC. This is the results of my graphs that I used the GPA2 tool to make. Right here is the veganism correlation graph with two veganism genes on the whole blood, and it has a very high correlation coefficient at 0.79. Right here is the obesity correlation graph for two obesity genes on the adipose subcutaneous, and it has a less correlation coefficient at negative 0.2h, which means it doesn't have much correlation. This is the gene expression correlations between veganism and obesity. So right here is the RIOK3 and the FTO correlation graph on the brain tissues, and it has high correlation with a correlation coefficient of 0.72. And right here is the RMC1 and MC4R correlation graph across the brain tissues with a correlation coefficient of 0.56. These are the SNPs associated with vegan and obesity genes. I found one similar SNP across all the veganism genes, which was RS72884519, and the positioning is the same, and the p-value is very low. Right here is the SNPs associated with both veganism and obesity genes. So I didn't find any common SNPs across the obesity genes. This was not surprising because I saw that like the gene expression correlation graphs for obesity did not have a high correlation coefficient. And I also did not find any common SNPs across both groups of genes, but I used the DeepSeek AI tool to discover certain SNPs across both groups of genes that interacted with each other. This is a table of the key interactions. As you can see, there's MPC1 interacting with LEPR, and RMC1 interacting with FTO, RIOK3 interacting with POMC, and RIOK3 interacting with MC4R. Summary. So first, I found the genes associated with each trait by Googling them, and these are my results. Then I found gene expression correlations between the genes and tissue types using the GPA2 tool, I found high correlation between veganism genes on the whole blood, low correlation between the obesity genes, and high correlation between both groups on the brain tissue. Then I used the GTEx tool to help me find similar SNPs between the veganism and obesity genes. Results I found RS728845519 on all the veganism genes, and then no common SNPs between obesity genes, and found interactions between SNPs on veganism and obesity genes. Future plans: I plan to experiment to see if other diets that are not necessarily vegan or vegetarian will affect obesity, and search for other SNPs across other genes related to diet and metabolism, and finally learn more about genes and EQTLs to understand my results better. Thank you for viewing my presentation.